Good morning. Good to see everyone this morning. If you will, turn to number 88. After this, we'll ask Austin to open us up with a prayer. Number 88, the gospel is for all. Of one the Lord has made the race, through one has come the fall. Where sin is gone must go His grace, the gospel is for all. The blessed gospel is for all. Where sin is gone must go His grace, the gospel is for all. Say not the heathen are at home, beyond we have no call. For why should we be blessed alone? The gospel is for all. The blessed gospel is for all. The gospel is for all. Where sin is gone must go His grace. The gospel is for all. Received ye freely, freely give. From every land they call. Unless they hear, they cannot live. The gospel is for all. The blessed gospel is for all, the gospel is for all. Where sin is gone must go His grace, the gospel is for all.
Heavenly Father, we come before you again, just thank you again for being our great God, and just thank you for being the creator and creating us, and we're thankful that we have this time that we're once again able to come here freely and worship. Father, we look forward to singing more songs then, and these songs of encouragement where we worship you and where we build one another up. Father, we pray for those who might be en route or who could be here, who could not be here. We ask that you be with them no matter what the situation. Father, we pray for the sick. We pray for this class that we have this morning and the services that we have throughout the day. And we just pray that we're able to open our ears and minds and listen to what's been said and contribute to what's been said, and that we do everything in the glory of Jesus. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Matthew chapter 25. Having given an illustration of Jesus coming with the parable of the 10 virgins, Jesus continues with a second kingdom parable of the talents. In many ways, the second parable amplifies the first one about the virgins, the wise and foolish girls, now the wise and foolish servants, both of which focus on the servanthood in the kingdom. Keep in mind that Matthew has provided us with several kingdom parables, but each one is represented at a particular stage or phase of the kingdom. These in chapter 25 focus upon the kingdom during Jesus' absence, after his ascension into heaven, awaiting his coming again. And this parable is speaking of stewardship of all Christians. Everything belongs to God because He created it, and He has entrusted it into our care. Just as He did in the garden when He gave Adam the garden to keep and dress it. Genesis 2 and verse 15. What we each possess is God's, and we will answer for the manner in which we cared for it and used it. God's time, God's money, God's life that He has given to each of us, and so on, is all His. The kingdom of heaven is like, in other words, God's spiritual government is like this, just like it was with the 10 virgins. When Jesus coming, we go back to chapter 24, where the disciples asked Jesus about his second coming, about his return. Jesus says, no one knows, only the Father. However, Jesus does know what it will be like during that waiting period. And that's what he's reflecting here in chapter 25. In verse 14, he continues, "For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, who called his own servants and delivered his goods to them. And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability. And immediately he went on a journey. Then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and made another 5 talents. Likewise, he who had received 2 gained 2 more also. But he who had received 1 went and dug in the ground and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. So he who had received 5 talents came and brought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You are faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. He also, who had received 2 talents, came and said, Lord, you delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I have gained 2 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. When he who had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown, gathering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid and went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours. But his Lord answered and said to him, You wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. So take the talent from him, give it to him who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has more will be given, more will be given. He will have abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So in this parable, Jesus focuses all his attention on the individual activity of the Christian. The foolish virgins squandered their time, ended up being left out in the cold. The virgin's parable stressed our readiness at all times for the coming of Jesus. This parable stresses our individual labor that is required in the kingdom and dedication to achieve only the best for the master. The wise in this parable seek the highest advantage of their Lord, of the church, as his footmen, his salesmen, his proclaimers. So the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling into a far country, Jesus says. Jesus, when he ascended into the clouds, Acts chapter 1, verse 9, of course into heaven at the right hand of God, went into a far country. So Jesus here implies to his disciples and to us that his absence is going to require a long stretch of time. How long? Only the Father knows. Chapter 21 and verse 33. Meaning his return is not going to be soon, like so many of our hymns teach. Luke 19, verse 11. Chapter 25, verse 19. Now the purpose here is that Jesus wants his disciples to understand that their questions are not linked together as one as they assume. Something he had tried to teach in chapter 24, but he's giving a fuller illustration of it here in chapter 25. They thought that all three of their questions would happen at the same time. The fall of Jerusalem, the temple, is going to occur a long time before Jesus' coming, however, as well as the end of the world. How long? We just don't know. But it's not going to be soon, which Jesus is trying to point out here. Now the word servants at the end of verse 14 comes from the Greek word douloi, which means slaves. Now our notion of a slave has been warped by the more modern way of slavery over the last few centuries. But the ancients had a different slant on slavery, a different type of relationship with slaves than what we often think of. Now that's not to say that there weren't bad masters, because there's always going to be that. But slaves in the first century, slaves in the ancient days, were often indentured slaves. For a time, we even had indentured slaves here in this country as well. What do we mean by indentured? You gave yourself as a slave to the person you owed a debt to that you couldn't pay. Until that debt was paid, you served them. Man, I can't even think of the name. There's that movie, William Holden and Loretta Young, where she's owes money, and he buys her debt, makes her indentured slave, so that his son can have a mother. But yeah, that was common in this country. But it was also common in the first century, and even before that. Depending upon the education of the individual, they might be used for menial labor, but more times than not, they would use in the areas in which they were educated in. And their expertise would help profit the master. Such slaves often were entrusted with large sums of money, taking care of their master's affairs. Do we see a Bible case of that? Bible example? Joseph. He was sold as a slave, wasn't he? And he was entrusted with Potiphar's house, wasn't he? Until he was falsely accused and thrown into prison. But then Pharaoh, after Joseph was able to interpret his dreams, Pharaoh brought him out and put him in charge of the entire country, all of his affairs. But he was still a slave. These slaves who are called, Dennis?
Well, I'm just thinking about another hypothetical, I guess. Let's say a business got themselves into financial hot water, so to speak, and somebody might pay that off, and they would become indebted to them. But then they, because of their expertise in business, might become an operator or responsible for that person's business on the water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, he could be the CEO. Yeah. He would still be indentured to that man. But yeah, he could be his CEO and run this company.
But the implication is a stark difference between the way that a slave owner then might treat their indentured servant
Hmm.
compared to what we saw sometimes in the United States often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, you even saw that in Ben-Hur when he was a slave on that ship. I mean, he was doing menial labor, rowing those battleships until he saved that one Roman who made him an adopted son. So, yeah. So here in our parable, these servants, these slaves, are this man's own slaves. They have become part of his household. Because they belong to him, he has proper and prior right to their time, to their efforts. These slaves are Jesus' disciples who have counted the cost of being his disciple and accepted the responsibility of being his slave, his steward. You know, the Apostle Paul often starts off his letters with the fact that he is a slave of God. Romans 1:1, Titus 1:1. Even though the lost and worldly do not acknowledge it, they too are slaves of God because he is the creator. They belong to him by right of their life, and has placed a responsibility upon them to obey the gospel, even though they may not acknowledge it, even though they may not choose to do so. But the lost are not part of this particular parable. So the man delivers to his servants his goods. The goods in this case is what? Talents of silver, quantities of money. Each talent being worth $1,000 in today's money. So this parable often is assumed to equate the talents to natural abilities. As we often hear somebody's, well, God didn't give me that talent. But the focus of this parable is on the money that the man gave his servants. There's nothing talked about here about natural abilities. Now, even though in principle, I guess, we could say that each talent represents a natural ability, but that's not Jesus' focus here. Because based on what he says, we can show that the two talents are distinct, the natural abilities and the money. First of all, the distribution of the talents is in the monetary sense, not natural abilities. Was something each slave, each steward did not originally possess. It belonged to the master, and he gave to the servant. Second, in verse 28, the talents are taken away from the foolish servant and given to another, which would be impossible if these are natural abilities. Thirdly, the talents distributed, as I said, belonged to the master, and he entrusted his property to his servants. Now, on the outset of this parable, we realize that not all Christians are equal, as the master knows those who are his. He knows the personal character of each one. He knows their abilities, that they're not the same. And we tell that by each one getting a different number of talents. The one-talent man was given what the master knew was within his ability to use, as was the 2- and 5-talent man. So the master would have been irresponsible had he given each man the same number of talents, knowing that a couple of them don't have the ability to take care of 5. Just because God saves us all on the same basis, Galatians 3, verse 28, does not mean he expects the same of us all. Our regeneration, our sanctification, does not dissolve our individuality. We're all different. His love prevents him from overloading us beyond our abilities. Revelation chapter 2, verse 24. John 16, verse 12. So after the man left for his journey, having handed out the talents, the 5-talent man, he went and he traded them, increased his talents by 5. Now the word straightway in verse 16. King James says straightway. Other translations say immediately. I think the New King James just kind of leaves that out. Just says then, instead of, which is really not correct, because there's that straightway, that Greek word there, shows the immediacy of this 5-talent man. And shows us that the master recognized the ability of this servant, that he would not waste his time sitting around trying to decide what he's going to do with these 5 talents. He knew the type of individual he was. So instantly upon receipt of the talents and the master departing, he jumped at the chance to promote the interests of his master. The same is true of the 2-talent man. Now, why did Jesus speak of these 2 servants and the doubling of the goods entrusted to them? Possibly it could be he's focused on the time it took for them to double their talents. If time is the focus of Jesus' illustration here, then the 2 men, not knowing when the master would return, felt they couldn't waste time in pleasing their master. investing his goods. We also notice the 2-talent man reacted like the 5-talent man. So we should never assume that there's no point in us trying because we have less than somebody else. You know, many congregations today, congregations of 25 or 50 or 100 members, are closing their doors because they look at congregations of 300 to 500 and, oh, we can't do as much as they do. Well, you do with what you have. That's what the 2-talent man did. Just didn't throw up his hands and say, well, we just can't do anything. Unlike the 5 foolish virgins, who at the very least, made preparations. They made some preparations for the bridegroom's return. They just didn't make enough. The 1-talent man did absolutely nothing. Huh? Yeah. Dug a hole and buried it. He erred because he is underconfident, because he's overcautious, unenterprising. He remains insensitive to his responsibilities to gain a profit for his master. He's not a great waster like the prodigal son, Luke 15:13. Nor is he a great debtor like the unforgiving servant, Matthew chapter 18, verse 23 to 35. This 1-talent man simply hides what belongs to his master and refuses to do anything to put that talent to work. Instead of attempting to put this 1 talent to work, even if he poorly invests it and loses it. Instead, he chooses to dig a hole in the ground and bury it. And he might even lose it to some treasure seeker that finds it. He most likely soothed his conscience by assuming he's being honest and prudent. Now we learn that after a long time, the master returns. Well, this long time is an indefinite amount of time, is meant to demonstrate how the master gave each servant plenty of time to make a profit for his Lord. I mean, the 1-talent man, him being gone a long time, the 1-talent man had time to think about what he'd done, repent, dig that talent back up and invest it. But he didn't. He buried it and forgot about it. I mean, at the very least, he could have put it in an interest-bearing bank account. Which is what his master told him, isn't he? The 5 and 2 talent servants, they could have grown lazy. They could have decided, well, he's not coming back, and gone out and spent it all. But they didn't. Now remember, Jesus is speaking to his disciples who asked him about his coming and the end of the world. So here Jesus relates how this master both went away into a far country and then returned after a long time. All to imply that Jesus' coming and the end of the world is going to be delayed longer than humanity expects. Chapter 24, verse 48. 2 Peter 3, verse 4 to 13. Now the 5-talent servant takes the original 5 that he had, plus his increase to his master, and presents them to him. He says, here's your 5. Now look, I've doubled what you've given to me. That Jesus should entrust us with his word to carry out into the world and to gain more souls for the kingdom is a joy. It's a treasure that we should all look forward to. 1 Thessalonians 2, verse 19, Philippians 2, verse 16, 2 Corinthians 1, verse 14, all speak of Paul's joy at Christ's coming because of the number of converts from his efforts and their abiding faith. What does the Master say? Well done, thou good and faithful servant. What glorious words any disciple of Christ would love to hear. He was good because he was dedicated to the task. And his faithfulness kept him from doing anything evil with the money when the master was gone for a long time. The same is true of the 2-talent man. As the master tells them both, you have been faithful in a few things, so I will set you over many things. What do you think Jesus means there? Been faithful over a few things, I'm going to set you over many things. If we're looking at this as Jesus going into a far country and then returning after a long time, his coming and the end judgment day, if we've been found faithful. What are the many things that he would set us over? Huh?
Heavenly things,
Yeah.
because we're talking about when he comes, he's found us faithful over a few things, over many, that would be heavenly things, whatever those things might be.
What does the scriptures tell us about the faithful?
I mean, beside me,
What?
that everyone that we say, but
Yeah. We're going to be judges of all the wicked and yeah. In what way? And we're going to be judges. In what way are we going to be judges? Doesn't the scriptures tell us that Jesus is going to judge everyone? So in what way are we going to be judges? Are we going to literally sit on thrones and judge everybody? Yeah. Yep. Yep. hmm In that sense, our lives can prove to others that it's possible to choose to live the abundant life. Our lives, how we lived, is going to judge everyone. Yeah, exactly. See, set over many things refers to our ruling over, being responsible for. And these two servants were to be advanced to greater things, enter into the joy of the Lord. Basically, I want the two of you to share in the same happiness that I've enjoyed. Which is what? Enjoying heaven. Heavenly bliss. If His goals become our goals, His work, our work, His desires, our desires, is that not part of the test that each one of us are to go through in this life? If this life is to prepare us for eternity? To find out whether or not we would really be happy in heaven? I mean, if our goals, if our work, if our desires are not the same as God's in the here and now, then they certainly aren't going to be in eternity. God will not grant us a heavenly home so that we can become perfect as He is perfect. Matthew 5:48. That's what this life is supposed to do. To prepare us for perfection. To help us become perfect so that we can hear those words, well done, and enter into His joy. The one-talent man faces his master, presents him with his one talent. Look what I've done. I protected it. I've saved it. Yeah, I didn't lose it. Yeah.
I guess I keep coming back to the idea of responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah.
First to recognize their responsibility, and they did something.
Mm-hmm.
Third one is, and also the idea of productivity. That is, there was an outcome to actively pursuing the responsibility they had.
Mm-hmm.
That is, they grew that double that power.
Yeah.
But there was no productivity aspect of
Other than digging a hole. Yeah.
bearing his responsibility.
And bearing his responsibility, yeah. Hiding it. Yeah, very good. Well, so he produces his one talent. And then he turns around and does what? accuses his master of being a tight-fisted, difficult man, thereby shifting the blame on his master for him not doing anything with that talent. Ironically, his attitude would kind of prove his accusation that the master was a hard man. But it wouldn't be because the master is actually a hard man. It's because of the indifference of the servant, forcing him to make an example of him. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, the woman you gave me, she's the one that caused all this. Man. Much like the Marxists of today, who look to those who use their own resources to build businesses and markets and employ millions of people to help them make a living, and then accuse them of becoming wealthy at the expense of their employees, while their employees get nothing out of it. Yeah, they make a living. You know, if it weren't for these the wealthy people making businesses, we wouldn't be able to. I mean, that's the problem with third world countries and that, is they only have people that only think about themselves. Then he claims he was afraid. The reason I buried this is because I was afraid, rather than using it. Really? You just insulted your master and you're trying to say you're afraid? He said he was driven to hiding it because of the harsh character of the master, and because the man would not gain anything himself by investing. It would go to the master. He wouldn't get anything out of it. Well, excuse me, you're a servant. You're getting room and board. You know? This man had the lightest responsibility of all three. And the master knew ahead of time that his abilities were not like the other two, which was why he only entrusted him with one talent. So the master answers him, "Thou wicked and slothful servant." Quite a difference between them, isn't it?
That's back to the idea of laziness.
Yeah.
He wasn't really fearful. He was just a lazy servant.
Yeah, lazy, yeah.
Maybe he was also, but certainly wasn't just.
Yeah. From the first two, good and faithful, to this man, wicked and slothful. Then we notice how the master would not even touch the one talent. He wouldn't even take it from the servant. He told someone else, "You take it and give it to the 10-talent man. Because I'm not accepting this. I don't want him to think anything good is coming out of this." Like the 5 foolish virgins, there's no opportunity left for this man to correct his actions. There are no second chances. All this man has left now is to be stripped from him is his privilege to serve. Verse 30 establishes the point of Jesus' illustration. Unprofitable not only describes this servant to a T, he refused to develop foresight, dependability, and like he said, responsibility. Outer darkness, weeping and gnashing of teeth are used several times in the Scriptures as a description of hell. Banishment to a place of eternal self-accusation and frustrated anger. That's quite an illustration, quite a parable. Any questions? Blanks? All right. Appreciate all the comments.